On April 23, 2006, a Texas man named Gary Brown was on his way to the Takugama Chimp Sanctuary in Sierra Leone, Africa for a day of sightseeing. With him were 2 American colleagues and 2 local men named Issa and Melvin. As the 5 drove along, all of a sudden this huge chimp came running out of the jungle, stopping in the road, just stopping the vehicle in its tracks. The driver, Issa, who was one of the locals, knew this chimp was not acting right, so he began to back away from it. But this 6-foot-tall, 270-pound alpha male chimp named Bruno was not having it. Bruno got down on all fours and just tore off after the vehicle. When he gets to the vehicle, he's screaming, he's pounding on it, he grabs one of the side mirrors, rips it off, throws it, runs to the back window, punches it out, and then leaps through the window into the back of the car, where he immediately begins to maul Melvin, who's sitting in between the 2 Americans, Gary and the other guy. This crazy fight breaks out where this chimp grabs Melvin's hand and bites off more than half of it. 3 fingers and most of his hand are gone. Somehow the men get this chimp back out the window, but Melvin's bleeding profusely, so Gary takes off his shirt, he uses it to try and staunch the flow of blood, and meanwhile Issa, he takes off forwards again down the road, trying to get away from this chimp which is pursuing them. Eventually they come to a locked gate, it's locked with a chain, and Issa attempts to ram through it. It works in so much as the gate opens, but it stalls the vehicle, so the men all bail out. Issa, he just goes tearing off down the road towards the jungle looking for help. The 2 Americans, who are not Gary, they get out and they run a little ways away, but they hold back waiting for Gary and Melvin. Meanwhile, this chimp runs up on top of the car, grabs Melvin out, rips him out, and begins mauling him again. By the time Gary gets out of the car, all he can hear is Melvin screaming, "Oh God, please, please help me." And now Gary is ticked. He looks down, he sees the biggest stick that he can find, he grabs it, he runs around the vehicle just in time to see this chimp finishing basically tearing off and eating one of Melvin's feet. There's just tendons hanging out. So Gary, he just goes charging up to this chimp. The chimp turns around, kind of bows up on him, but Gary uses this stick as a lance and rams it into Bruno the chimp's throat as hard as he can. And this drives Bruno on his back, and then Bruno takes off into the jungle. So Gary, he helps Melvin up and they begin hobbling down the road. The 2 Americans and Melvin and Gary would eventually make it to the main road. Melvin and Gary would be picked up by a military truck and taken to the hospital, where Melvin would make it just fine. But once they got there, shortly after, Gary was in the parking lot when a van pulled up. And when they opened up the back of that van, there in the back were the remains of Issa. He had run into the rest of this troop of chimps which had escaped earlier that day, and they had mauled him to death, taking off his jaw, disemboweling him, taking both of his hands and feet, and taking off his genitals.